The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the ECAT staff or board of directors.
Well, since there's no one here to introduce me, I will introduce myself. I'm Richard Tripp, and I am an English teacher. I always like to start by telling people that I'm not an expert on Zuni culture, even though I'm going to talk a lot about it, even though I've written a several hundred-page book about it. I'm not an anthropologist, an ethnologist, or a sociologist. I don't know how people measure cultures and determine what makes them who they are. I'm just a very lucky person who had the opportunity to be there for 3 years.
Excuse me.
Hey, Dottie, come on in. And so here I am telling you about Zuni. And I also want to tell you, I didn't go from Lakeville to Zuni, like point A to point B right away. It was a little bit more circuitous than that. I was about to graduate from Bridgewater State College in, I hate to say the year, but it really is relevant, I guess, 1967. I know, half of you weren't born yet. And although I had been a commuting student from Lakeville, yet I was still kind of invested in the campus. I had never lived in the dorm, but when you get ready to leave from someplace, suddenly you become sentimental about it. I don't know how that works, but I thought one day, about a month before graduation, I think I'll walk through Boyden Hall one more time, because a good many of my English classes had been in Boyden Hall. So as I was walking through the hall, a young man stepped out of a room and sort of stepped right in front of me, and he said, "I'm getting ready to show a Vista recruitment film. Would you like to come in and see it?" And I said, "I don't even know what Vista is." And he said, "Well, it means Volunteers in Service to America. It's the Domestic Peace Corps." And I said to him, "Well, I've had 2 jobs offered, and I'm considering those, but I said, when I leave school, I'm going to have to tell the draft board I'm no longer covered by being in school for deferment, so I'm not sure what my future is going to be exactly." And then he told me something very magical and wonderful. He said, "Anybody who is accepted by the government to be a Vista volunteer or Peace Corps volunteer has an automatic deferment, at least for the amount of time that you're serving in that capacity." So I went in and saw the film. The first part of the film wasn't very interesting to me, but the second part really caught my attention. It was a young woman riding on horseback through the southwest open area on the Navajo reservation. She was going from Hogan to Hogan, talking to families about signing their kids up for either preschool or kindergarten classes. And when I saw the landscape there, that wide open sky and that high mountain desert, and the brilliant sun and the beautiful colors of the landscape, I thought, that's where I want to be. That's what I want to do. So I took the application and I said to him, "Remember, by the end of the month, I have to know what it is I'm going to do. So if this is going to be an alternative for me, I need to know sooner than later." And he said, "I will make sure that this application is handled immediately." And of course, I didn't really believe that it would be. But in 2 weeks, I had a letter saying, "You've been selected to go to the University of Oklahoma to have your training to be a Vista volunteer." So a couple of weeks after graduation, I got on a plane for the first time in my life. I was a very provincial, local person. And I left New England for the second time in my life. I had been to the New York World's Fair the year before. Ooh. Well-traveled I was. So when I got to Oklahoma, I found that most of the people that were in my training group were going to be destined to go to inner city situations and do community development. And I thought, well, that isn't what I would choose to do, perhaps, but it is better than other alternatives. So I threw myself into the training, and I wasn't deselected as some members were. We never knew why. People would be plucked out sometimes and just sent home on a plane, and I don't think we ever knew why they were chosen to leave. But I made it through, and on the last day when we were going to get our assignments, they came around and they talked to all of us, and the guy who was in charge of sending us off to our new projects said to me, "You're the only person here with teacher certification and with some teaching experience." That was just two student, what's that called, Barbara?
Student teaching.
Yeah, student teaching. So he said, "We're sending you to a psychiatric hospital." Not as a patient, but as a person in charge of a school that's been set up by a volunteer woman from Tulsa. It's for kids. The school is for kids, ostensibly. There were other people who came to the school as well, but it basically was for kids who had an interruption in their studies and who couldn't continue being in their own school and were taking a break for therapy or analysis or something, and then hoping to go back to school with their education not interrupted. So I became the head teacher there. I won't tell you much about that because that's not what this is about, but I was there for 2 years. So in 1969, when I was getting ready to leave Vista, you have to remember that, or know that nobody had a laptop in 1969, and Google was not invented. So I didn't know how to find a reservation. So I opened an atlas, and I chose in northern New Mexico the 3 cities that had the biggest circles on them. They were Santa Fe, Albuquerque, and Gallup, all within a reasonable distance of one another by Western standards, not by Massachusetts standards, but by Western standards. And I got on the phone and I called the Department of Education in each of those places and said, "I'm looking for a high school English teaching job for the fall. Do you have a position?" All 3 people said yes. So I made an appointment. Monday, I would have an interview in Santa Fe. Tuesday, Albuquerque. Wednesday, in Gallup. I got on a plane, not just for the second time. I'd been doing a little flying back and forth. I got on a plane and I flew to Albuquerque on a Saturday, took the bus up to Santa Fe, and I had a room in the La Fonda Hotel, looking out over the plaza. You may know that Santa Fe is the oldest state capital in the country. It was founded in 1610, well before it was a state. In fact, Spain still owned that property as part of Mexico at the time. But the Palace of the Governors is there, where the Indians sit on their blankets and sell their silver and turquoise jewelry. And just the air, the sky, the light, everything about that place said to me, "You're going to be so happy living here." And I was really excited. So I went Monday morning for my interview at the school. I had one small disappointment, which I quickly overcame. The school was a middle school, not a high school. And they had promised me it was a high school. Now, if you know anything about teaching, you know that elementary teachers don't want to teach middle school, and middle school doesn't want to teach high school, and, I thought, if I have to teach middle school to be in Santa Fe, I'm willing to make that sacrifice. So I had a really nice interview with the principal, and he said, the superintendent would like to have you call this afternoon and find out the results of our conversation. So when I called, she said, the superintendent, she said, I'm sorry, Richard, we don't think you're the right person for the job. And I said, do you mind telling me why? And she said, we don't think you can handle the discipline. And I said, have you read my resume? I work in a psychiatric hospital. My life has been in danger any number of times. I have students trying to commit suicide jumping out of a second floor window into lilac bushes, and I have to prevent them from doing that. I probably could handle almost anything. And she said, thanks for coming. You're not the right person. So, okay, I was disappointed, but I still had two options. I went to Albuquerque, and the next morning when I went to this dilapidated city school, it was summer vacation now, so people didn't need to wear suits and ties, but somehow the guy who interviewed me was in a suit and a tie and sweating buckets, and I thought, it didn't feel very comfortable. He had absolutely no interest in my past, in my teaching career so far, 2 years of it. And he asked me the most boring, predictable questions. And I gave him equally boring and predictable answers, I'm sure. And I thought to myself before I was out of that room, scratch this one off the list. I got on the train that afternoon and went to Gallup. And darkness was falling when I got there. And when I got out of the depot, I was confronted by something that was very different from this idyllic vision that I had of that young woman riding on horseback from Hogan to Hogan on the reservation. There were 3 drunk Navajos, semi-conscious, lying on the sidewalk with their bottles of wine twisted into a paper bag. And I thought, oh, I don't know about this. And there was no interstate that went around the town at the time. It was Route 66 going right through the town, right where I was. And there was all of this gaudy light and everything. And I thought, I think I'm going to have to go back to the institution for another year. I think I'm just going to have to start looking a little bit earlier and plan a little bit better. I thought, I'll just get on the plane in the morning and I'll go back. I won't even go to the interview. But in the morning, I felt differently. The air was crisp and clean and nice, and the sun was bright, and I don't know, the town was quiet, and there were no Navajos on the street with paper bags. And so I thought, well, it would be rude of me to just blow off the interview. So I went to the Department of Education and met a man called Barney Elder. And he interviewed me, and he was from Oklahoma. And he had heard of Eastern State Hospital in Veneta, and he was quite interested in my experiences there, and we had quite a long talk about that. And I kept wondering when he was going to ask me like philosophical things, but he didn't. And I see now that there were other reasons why he didn't do that. And I thought, I think he's going to offer me a job. And it gave me a real dilemma because I didn't really want to be in Gallup. Santa Fe was where I had wanted to be, and that was not a possibility. So within a few minutes, he said, I'd like to offer you a job. And then there was a hesitation. It was one of those but moments. And he said, but, and he looked at me, and his face was the picture of apology. He said, the job isn't here in Gallup. And I wanted to say, oh, too bad. He said, the job is 40 miles south of here on the Zuni Pueblo Indian Reservation. And inside, I guess it was a rush of adrenaline, or I don't know what it was. I'm not much for science, but I felt really excited and weak. I thought I was going to fall down. But being a New Englander, of course, I said, oh, well, I said, I could be interested in that, but I'd hesitate to take on a job if I haven't seen somebody in the school, had a look at the school, had a look at the village where I'd be living. So he picked up the phone and he called one of the teachers and he said, I have some important paperwork that needs to go to the principal in Zuni and a young man who'd like to look at the school for about an hour and see the village. And so that lady very kindly took me to the reservation. And I knew that Santa Fe was okay. I could have been in a middle school in Santa Fe. And no, I was on a reservation. It was wonderful. So I went back to New Mexico the next day on the plane, and I had a contract signed. I was no longer a professional volunteer. I had been a volunteer all of my life. I was now almost 26 years old, and the only real paying job that I had had was a Vista volunteer, where I think I was paid $50 every 2 weeks. It was minimal. So I had a contract for $4,300 a year. Ooh. It was very exciting. So when I got back, I finished up my business in Veneta, Oklahoma. And at the end of August, I rented a U-Haul truck. I knew I would need a car, living 40 miles from the nearest grocery store. So I bought a little Volkswagen Beetle from a nurse friend. Now, I used to trust nurses completely. This car drank oil the way you and I drink water to stay alive. I couldn't drive to Tulsa, which was 60 miles away, without pouring a couple of cans of oil in. But I bought the car for $400, so I couldn't complain. I hooked the car onto the back of the U-Haul. I put my dog in the car and my I put my dog in the truck, my 2 cats in the car, and I had books and all kinds of rubbish that I was going to carry to New Mexico with me in the van. And I drove there. And I want to read to you a couple of passages. This is the very first page of the book called Arriving in New Mexico, August 1969. Desert darkness descended somewhere between Albuquerque and Gallup. My 2-day drive to Oklahoma, alone except for the company of my dog Molly, in a U-Haul pulling an old Volkswagen, would soon end. And I was exhausted, my eyes bleary, my brain tired of solitary, voiceless thought. I nervously watched the signs that told me the distance to Gallup, calculating gas and mileage. Because I was down to the last $5 bill neighbors back in Oklahoma had tucked into a farewell food basket. I did not own a credit card, and thanks to a ruined tire on the Volkswagen en route, no money. I felt the tension of being poor. The winking lights of Gallup seemed friendly as Route 66 wound into town. It was well after 9 p.m., and I felt too incoherent to drive the last 40 miles to Zuni. So where to spend the night on $5 would be my last worry this August evening. Gallup blazed with gaudy lights, fast food establishments, restaurants, gas stations, and motels lured the tourist traffic. To my right, a long stretch of darkness lay, the familiar train tracks and station I had arrived in 2 months earlier for my interview. With little warning, the city limits seemed to be about to end. Arizona seemed to be the next stop. An all-night cafe and truck stop appeared to my left. With only $5, the choice was easy. I would have a hot meal in the cafe, sleep with my dog on the seat of the U-Haul, then drive to Zuni in the morning. Inside, the cafe pulsed with country western ballads. I sat in a booth where I could see everything. Through the swinging door came a middle-aged Navajo woman, her coal-black hair tied with a scarf in a knot at the back of her head. She had on a bright velveteen blouse and a colorful pleated cotton skirt, quite a contrast to the younger Indian girls clad in jeans. The stunning contrast of her clothing with the stainless steel and vinyl of her surroundings became my first hint of culture shock awaiting in Zuni. Anxiety and tension from travel and anticipation of getting to the reservation the next day didn't keep me from sleeping, although I awakened once or twice as large rigs with air brakes pulled in or out. Sleep descended quickly that night. So in the morning, I drove to Zuni to unload my things in a little apartment that they had waiting for me. The people who live in Zuni, no one other than a Zuni person owns land. I'm not even sure if the Zuni people own land, but they have land and they have houses which get passed down matrilineally. Women inherit houses from their mothers. Their daughters will inherit the house from them. And there's no place for teachers to live. So they have these little motel-like structures on the grounds of every school. They're called teacherages, and that's where the teachers live. So the teacherage is like a little white island or a little white reservation inside an Indian reservation, inside a massive, expansive New Mexico. And after just maybe 2 weeks, I could tell that I was not going to be a happy camper in the teacherage. And I'll tell you why. It was the teachers. I went there not knowing how long I might stay, and I did stay for 3 years. But I wanted some rapport with the people that I worked with. I wanted to be friendly with my students and with their parents. I wanted to know about their culture, and I wanted to know what it was I should be teaching these kids, because I knew that from the books they gave me, which were all like about 35 to 50 years old, and were the writings of dead white men, mostly, that not even living white teenagers wanted to read. I knew that Indian teenagers didn't want to read these things. So I didn't want to be associated really completely with the school. And the teachers were an issue too. So I categorized the teachers. At my table, I sat every night and had my dinner by myself. And on the other side of my table, I had my portable typewriter. And when I had a memory of something that I had thought about that day, or a vision, or maybe I saw a ceremony, or maybe a student told me something interesting, I'd get up and I'd type it out, which is why I could write this book so many years afterwards. So these are the categories I put people in. Of course, I was in a category. I was a young, inexperienced, relatively new teacher. There were about a dozen of us in the teacherage. They weren't very interesting people. They were mostly from Oklahoma and Texas. They talked funny. They had funny attitudes. And I could tell that even though I wasn't any world-wise person then, that I was a lot more interesting than they were. And then also another benign group were the really elderly people. Apparently there was a retirement age from Texas, I think it was. I don't remember if it was 65 or 70, but you couldn't teach after that. But I swear most of these people were like in their 80s. I'm not an ageist. I'm 81, so I'm not bad-mouthing any group of people. But a lot of these people were very strange. There was the home economics teacher who wore a cape, which is fine. I'd wear a cape too, but I didn't then. And she wore opera-length gloves that came up to her elbows. And she drove this very snazzy, big Chrysler. And for an afternoon's entertainment, she'd drive to Gallup, 40 miles away, to go to McDonald's for a hamburger. And when some girls asked her to come to the most sacred ceremony of the year at the beginning of December, Shalako, she said, "Oh, my dear, I couldn't do something like that. That's so superstitious." You know, I mean, just putting people down, putting their religion down. And then up from there, there were some really nice teachers, but most of them had young families. It was usually husband and wife teams. And they didn't have time to be friendly to the young people, many of whom were going to leave at the end of the year. Some left before the end of the year, even. And then there were, I hate to say, the weirdos who chain smoked and sat at their kitchen tables. Well, all you had to do was walk through the teacherage, and I like to look through people's windows as I'm walking by, you know. There wasn't much else to do there, you know. When you're confined to this little island of teachers, they'd be sitting at their kitchen tables watching TV, and that's what they did from the time they got out of school till bed. And, you know, and there were some alcoholic teachers there who, because there was a turnover of teachers there, about 30% every year of the teachers left. So the school wasn't going to fire anybody. They had hard enough time filling people who left voluntarily, filling their spots. So these teachers who probably couldn't have held jobs any other place were secure in their jobs there. And then we're getting into the danger zone now. There were people there who were there to make money because they wanted to buy a ranch, or they wanted a bar in Colorado, or I don't know, they had other dreams that they were pursuing. And then the two people that I remember best of all are the guy who came around and wanted to know what our religious preferences were. He came to all the young teachers, and he said, "I'm thinking," he lived in a house trailer at the teacherage. He said, "I'm thinking of having a Sunday evening Bible study group." And he was determining who might come. And I guess I gave him all the wrong answers because I never got invited. And I wish I had been, because I thought at the time I was single. I thought it might be a social thing. I wouldn't mind going to a Bible study if there were some young women there. And I asked a friend of mine a couple of weeks later, "How come Norm didn't ask me to the Bible study?" And he said, "Well, he said there was no hope for you." So, and that teacher put Bible verses in all the Halloween candy that year. And I thought, oh. And then, worst of all, were the jewelry traders, the people who left their classes during class time to go and meet with the people they bought jewelry from, the squash blossoms or the rings or the belt buckles or whatever, and who very freely said, "I make 10 times my salary by selling jewelry." And that was what they were there for. Being a teacher gave them access to the people who produced the jewelry. So that's why I didn't want to stay at the teacherage. So I had a friend named Robert. He was a first-year teacher just out of college, and he was a math teacher. He still he's in Santa Fe now. He's still a very good friend. And one day we got in the Volkswagen, made sure we had a couple of cans of oil with us, and we would just travel down the side roads. There was only one paved road that went through Zuni. It was Highway 53, just a 2-lane road. And one day we chose to take a right-hand turn off of the road, and this is what happened. Doyalani, by the way, is the kind of motif number 1. It's the sacred mesa in Zuni, very important place to the Zuni people. The road around Doyalani wound on. and the mountain stretched further to the south than could be seen from the road. The car seemed to drive itself, kept in place by the deeply rutted tire tracks. After my initial reverence in the presence of the mesa, I became intoxicated by the freedom of the place and the feeling of being really remote. The mesa was directly to our left, and others appeared to the south, yet our perimeter seemed unbounded. The openness, the quiet beauty of the waning afternoon on a southwest reservation made me giddy. Shockingly blue pinon jays darted out of the junipers. In my joy and excitement, I accelerated the little car and we went sliding through the ridges of sand the recent rains had swirled into the lane, bumped over a couple of shallow washes and passed through gold and gray-green rabbit brush that stood nearly as tall as the car. Robert and I laughed as the little car bounced. I swerved around between big grassy tussocks. Then we saw it, a small, low house of neatly quarried stone with little square windows catching the diminishing light. I stopped the car wondering if we were imposing on someone's privacy, although the place suggested inactivity and abandonment. Something special about that place on that rise right next to the towering of the mesa struck me instantly, and I knew that I wanted to live here. So, wow, it was great. Luckily, across an arroyo, Robert and I saw a guy working with some sheep, and so we trudged over there, and I said, "Who owns that little house?" And he said, "My mother-in-law." And I said, "Would she be interested in renting it?" And he said, "I don't know, you'd have to ask her." So I found out her name, found out where she lived, and I went to see her that week. And I could tell she probably thought I was a weirdo. She said, "Well, why would you want to live there?" She was speaking through her daughter. She didn't speak English. Her daughter was bilingual. And I stretched the truth a little bit. I said, "Well, I have many relatives who live on farms in Massachusetts." Not farms anything like what I was looking at, but I said, "I've helped on their farms and I've stayed with them, and I feel really, much better when I'm out in the country." And she said, "Well, maybe I'll go over there Thursday and see what things look like," because nobody lives there. So when she said she was going there Thursday, I knew she was going to rent it to me. And I went Thursday afternoon after school. One of her grandsons was up on the roof with a bucket of tar and a rag on a stick, and he was putting tar on all the nail holes. It's amazing how we thought there were thousands of blotches of tar up there. We thought all the nail holes were covered, but the only place in the building that was safe from the rain was actually where my bed was. It was really quite good. All I had to do was hunker down on my bed when it rained, but it didn't rain there much. It was great. Everybody in the village knew me instantly. Everybody thought it was really cool. I was living more like a Zuni than even Zunis lived. I had a mud floor. I had a house that was adobe and stone. I had no electricity. I had no plumbing. I had an outhouse without a door even, which was okay because the nearest neighbor was at least 2 miles away. And I used to like being in the outhouse and looking up at planes as they went overhead. And by my guess, from the angle of the planes, I figured they were going from Los Angeles to Chicago. And I thought, I bet there are people up there with attaché cases with important documents in them, and I bet they're having martinis. And I bet they don't realize that anybody is as lucky as I am to be in this situation. And I had to get my water at a spring, which seeped out between the sandstone rocks in the side of the mesa. It was just a wonderful place to be. Boys borrowed their father's trucks and came and helped me gather firewood. I hadn't realized how cold the winters were going to be there. And if you haven't been to New Mexico, a lot of people who see it on a map say, oh, it's the South. It must be really hot there. Well, it can be hot in summer, but the altitude where I lived was 6,800 feet. And the coldest that I knew it ever got to was 55 below zero on the thermometer, not wind chill factor. School was closed for a week because the furnace would not keep the school warm enough. And I was always warm by my fire because I split and cut my own wood. And it was just an amazing place to be. A lot of people came by, invited or uninvited. The ones who came uninvited were the most interesting. One night I had been doing my grades and I added everything up. I didn't have a calculator. Nobody had calculators, I guess, in 1969 rather. I added them all up, I divided, it was awful. I'd have 2 kerosene lamps on my table and I'd still, after an hour, have a splitting headache because there just wasn't enough light. And one night I was on my bed, wood fire going. Molly didn't hear anybody coming, my dog. I didn't hear anybody coming. All of a sudden, there was this bang, bang, bang on the door, and I ran to the door, and there were 3 very stout-looking, middle-aged Zuni men there. And I thought, oh my God. One of them had a rifle over his shoulder. And I thought, well, I can't. They know I'm here. The only way to lock my house was a padlock on the outside. I didn't have a padlock on the inside. So I opened the door and they said, our friend here, the guy in the middle, was being held up by them. They said, he's fallen, we think his back is broken, we need a ride to Black Rock, the hospital. So I said, oh, okay. I was so relieved. He's broken his back. I'm safe. They're not here to kill me. So I thought, how am I going to get them? Oh, by this time, the Volkswagen was no more. And now I had an $800 Ford pickup truck, which I needed to gather firewood. I thought, how am I going to fit these 3 hefty guys in the cab of a pickup truck? But as I got ready to go, they were saying, well, maybe we don't need to go to the hospital. Maybe we just need. Actually, we were down in the Box Canyon below here. The guy who's got the ranch here has been losing sheep to coyotes. We're here to exterminate the coyotes and to kill the sheep that have been maimed and can't survive. We just need a ride down there. They said, actually, our truck got stuck in the sand and we've walked this far and we need a ride. So I took them. And I went in, they invited me in for a cup of coffee, which I don't drink, but I wanted to be friendly. So I went in for a cup of coffee. And inside this room, no bigger than this, and it was a 1-room shack like I lived in, were all of these cuts of meat hanging down. It was like being inside a locker, a butcher's locker. And before I left, they took one of these big things down and they sliced off a flank and they gave it to me in thanks for the ride. And I took it back to my house and I hung it from my beams. And I thought, I'm really one of them now. I've got my food on the ceiling and I thought I'll make mutton stew, but I didn't think about it for a couple of weeks. And then when I thought maybe I was ready to make mutton stew, I took it down and it had this fine green film all over it, mold. And I thought, oh. And I hated to be middle class about it. There's nothing I hate worse than being middle class. So I took it out and I flung it into the night air. And a couple of days later, Molly found it. And she loved it. And it didn't do her any harm. So I knew eventually that I probably could not stay in this sheep camp for too long because sometimes the truck wouldn't start in the morning and I had to walk the 2 miles to school. And I had my dog, and she had a puppy. The puppy's name was Weyetsana, which is Zuni for puppy. And I would have to carry the puppy in my arms like this, partly to keep me warm and partly to keep the puppy warm. And when I got to school, the condensation from my breath would have frozen my beard to the puppy's fur. And luckily, I had never given up my little apartment in the teacherage because I had anticipated, number one, maybe I can't make it through a winter there. I don't know. Number two, maybe Mrs. Cucci will kick me out because she'll need it for lambing in the spring. So I had kept the apartment, and when I went to school every day, it was a great place to have lunch, and I have to confess, it was a good place to have a hot shower too. I'm charading, it's a charade, I'm trying to pass myself off as this rugged person, but maybe I'm not. Anyway, I knew that Mrs. Cucci did say in the spring, the sheep herders need the cabin, so you'll have to leave. So I said to my students, everybody knew me now, everybody knew me. I said, I need to rent a place in the Pueblo, which was really audacious because no white people lived in the Pueblo at all. This is the stacked buildings. And it was a student who eventually found me this little 2-room house. And it was wonderful to live there. So I went to live in the house the second year I was there. And this is what it was like being there at the very beginning. The section is called Getting Acclimated. Two events happened the first weekend at the new house that seemed to foreshadow many experiences that were about to happen in my 2 years in the center of the village. Fall's early darkness settled in, and the simultaneous busy activity that always accompanies such an evening began. Carol, a new friend and teacher at Doyalani Elementary School, and I sat listening to the chatter of people passing the house. Now and then, an axe sounded somewhere as people chopped wood near scraps of burning kindling for light. I jumped up to respond to the sudden knock on the door. 4 or 5 Zuni teenagers tumbled in the doorway. One student said she and her friends had wanted to get warm for a minute while waiting for another friend to return from Gallup. They rubbed the coolness of the evening from their hands. They seemed more animated and vigorous than I had ever seen them in school. Caught off guard, I said, yes, they could get warm a while. I was unsure of my role in the village yet. They wouldn't take a seat, but they seemed to want to watch from the window for their friend's return, turning their backs to us. Although not yet acclimated to my new home, yet it was my home, and I suddenly felt a stranger here. Carol and I retreated to the back room where we set about organizing boxes of clutter from the apartment. Not much time had gone by when I heard a muffled but distinctive pop-top can. It wasn't soda. I knew, for everyone at school talked about the problem of alcohol abuse. I really didn't like the awkwardness of the situation. The teens were now standing or sitting on a trunk in the corner of the dimly lit room. They seemed oblivious to me as I approached, but when I told them I wanted them to leave, one of the group, whom I recognized as the Pueblo governor's son, stepped challengingly close to me. Why do you live here? He wanted to know. What gives you the right to intrude in the village? I was taken aback, unable to respond with the obvious question of my own, asking him to explain what gave him the right to challenge me after I'd offered them hospitality. Beer courage made this teenager a kind of student I had not yet encountered, bold, belligerent, loud. As we stood face to face, all kinds of thoughts of insecurity raced through my mind. Moving to the village had been a mistake. I wasn't welcome. Surely this boy voiced what others felt but were too polite to say. I would be in trouble with the school or with the villagers. It would appear that I had invited the students and sanctioned their drinking. Before any decision requiring action could take place, several of his friends grabbed the boy's sleeve, and as quickly as they had tumbled in earlier, the students left. Carol left, and once again, the home became quiet. I tried to get the feeling of being settled in. Exhaustion got the better of me, and I made my escape from the problems of the moment by falling into a deep sleep. But this happened in the morning, which made me feel okay about being in the house and determined to stay. When I awoke shortly after dawn, the second new experience of the house happened. I walked to the front window to look out at the morning in time to see perhaps a dozen women walking single file past the house. Over their house dresses, they wore cross-stitched aprons and flowered shawls. On top of each woman's head was balanced a large pottery olla, steam pouring from the top. No woman spoke. Two scampering dogs provided the only other movement. Watching the women that first morning in the early light between the houses and the bread ovens with the pole corrals behind them on the riverbank and a pastel swirl of cover over the mist of the mesas to the south, I saw a modern version of something age-old in Zuni. I imagined they must be taking food to the men in the kiva somewhere. The picturesque scene transported me. For this exquisite vision, I determined there and then that I would live in the Pueblo in spite of those who did not want me there. So, as with the sheep camp, I had many visitors in the village, some invited and some uninvited. One that was very amusing to me was another young teacher who was friendly with me, and all the young teachers thought it was way cool that I was living the way I was. And they brought over a young woman who had just been hired to fill, somebody didn't even last half a term and went home, and then somebody was hired over the telephone, probably not knowing she was coming to an Indian reservation. And they brought her to this mutual friend brought her to my house to see how I lived. Wood fire going, in the village I had cold running water. I had electricity. I had a toilet that flushed. If you poured a 5-gallon bucket of water in the tank. It was wonderful. And before the young woman left, who was new to the village, she said to me, "Do they make you live here?" Which I thought was really cute because, of course, I wanted to live there. To me, it was ideal. One of the things that I learned in Zuni was how to make pottery. And I learned from a lady named Daisy. Her grandmother was Nampeo, who, if you know anything about the Southwest, you've heard of a Hopi woman named Nampeo who at the turn of the 20th century revived Southwest pottery. And she was working in the school cafeteria. And my principal came and asked me, all the teachers were supposed to have extracurricular activities that they did. I was not a football coach. I was not a basketball coach. I was not any kind of a coach. And my principal said to me, "Would you sponsor the Native American dance troupe?" And I said, "Well, I don't know how I could do that. I don't know the songs. I don't know the music. I don't know the dances. I don't know anything about the costumes." He said, "It's not a problem. There's a lady working in the cafeteria named Daisy. She will be your assistant." What I was is I was her assistant. I was the legal, guardian of the group, according to the school committee, but she was the real teacher. And she told me the story of her life, which I didn't think she was lying to me, but I thought, this can't be right. As a young woman, she had a virus that made her begin to go blind. I'm not sure how scientific I'm saying this. It's something like that. And the teacher on the Hopi reservation was banging her head against the blackboard because Daisy said, "I can't see to do the numbers, the addition or the subtraction or division or whatever she was doing, the math she was doing on the blackboard." and the teacher was banging her head on the blackboard. Just as fate would have it, a wealthy heiress from Santa Barbara came by, looking in, and she took Daisy in hand and she said to her parents, I will take her to California and get the operations that she needs. And they were successful. And this woman sponsored Daisy from then on, educationally. When Daisy graduated high school, this lady sent her to study at the Sorbonne in Paris. And Daisy studied sculpture with Rodin. Now, you can imagine, this is a lady who's been cooking fry bread and beans in the cafeteria. And she tells me this, and I'm thinking, oh, come on. It's true. You can Google it and find out. So I said to Bill Butler, the principal, you need to hire this woman as the art teacher. And he said what all superintendents and principals say. Does she have paper credentials? Well, of course she didn't. But she had empathy, and she had knowledge, and she was wonderful with the kids. So she was hired as an aide, and I convinced her to teach an adult evening course. And that's where I learned to make pottery. And I wanted to read you just one little thing that tells you this is what Zuni people are like. This is what Pueblo people are like in general. I admired Daisy's ability to treat lightly what some people take too seriously. Some weeks into the course, when we were all working on second and third pieces, Daisy sanded on a large jar, the squat-shouldered kind associated with the Hopi. Its very shape and size seemed to defy the natural laws, with its almost saucer-like shape and thin walls that curved in, covering most of the opening on the top. Daisy worked on this for weeks, just in shaping and sanding. One evening, the public health service doctor husband of one of the teachers came in to watch the end of class and accidentally crushed the jar, which was hidden behind a newspaper on the table. A very embarrassed silence came over the room. The young doctor apologized profusely, but Daisy's laughter eased the situation. She explained that she had made many such jars and would in all probability make many more, so there was no need to be worried about the one that broke. This easiness to Daisy's personality, so typical of the Pueblo people, made working with her enjoyable. She helped when a pot went out of control. She took her work seriously, yet not too seriously. She gave us a feeling for the spirit behind what we created as we struggled to construct the vision of what each of us had of Pueblo pots and what they represented. Because the Pueblo people think of pottery is very sacred to them because they do spiritual things with it, but it's also because the clay is from the land, and they're taking what they call the skin of Mother Earth, and they're turning it into something that's useful to them and practical, but also, like I said, perhaps even spiritual. And this is my first piece of pottery right here. It's called a Gyawiawalikia, and it's a cornmeal carrying bowl that the rain priests, when they come into the plaza with the dancers behind them, they come in sprinkling the cornmeal on the ground to bless the trail for their dancers to come on. One little story that I will tell you about this Gyawiawalikia that I made. I was at a student's parents' home one evening for dinner when two mudheads came. They're also called koyemshi. They're these men who are slathered in terracotta-covered mud. They wear a dance kilt. They have this grotesque leather mask over their head with all of these knobs on it. I mean, they look really horrific. They're very scary. They make certain noises too, which a couple of years ago when my son-in-law was out there, he was actually scared of them, which I thought, he's a policeman. I thought that was really interesting. But they come to gather food to take to the people who are having difficulties financially in the village. and they wear this little sack on their back, a woven black piece of cloth, and you put food in it. And then you get your Yahweh Awalikia out and you sprinkle the sacred cornmeal on their heads and you say a prayer, and then they go away. And it's very important that you do that, because if you don't share your wealth or your food with them, fire visits you. Now, they don't come and do arson or anything. Well, at least they said they didn't. So I don't know. But, you know, kindling might catch on fire in the back of your stove, or something will happen like that. So one day when the wind was really blowing, my dog started barking. I didn't hear somebody knocking at the door. This is in the village now. And I went and I looked out, and there were two mudheads. And I thought, oh my God, I've got to let them in. So I grabbed my dog and I pulled her to the back room and closed the door, and then I ran and I opened. And Daisy luckily had said to me, when they come to your house, face 2 chairs to the east and say, Achimu, which means the two of you sit down. And then she said, you put the gifts of food in their bag, and then you get out your Gawi Awalika and you spread the sacred cornmeal on them, and then you say the prayer. Well, I was always running out of food. I don't know how that happened. I didn't eat much, but I didn't have much food either. And I went to my shelf and I thought, oh no. The only 2 canned goods that I had that I could give them were a can of minced clams, because as a New Englander, I had to make clam chowder every once in a while, but you couldn't get real clams, so I had minced clams. And the second thing was cranberry sauce. And I thought, when these guys get back to the kiva where they unload these bags, they're going to know they're going to know what I gave them. And then I was very proud. I had made the Gyawi Awalikia. Daisy had given me some sacred cornmeal to put in it. I went with great ceremony to my cupboard and opened the door, hoping they could see me through those little holes in the, see my Gyawi Awalikia. I sprinkled the meal behind them, and I thought, I don't know the prayer. Now, I had several options. I could say, I'm sorry, I don't know what to say. I haven't learned this yet. I could maybe mutter the Lord's Prayer and hope they were not bilingual. Maybe they didn't understand English. Or I could just say something that sounded like Zuni, but wasn't. I don't know. My knowledge of Zuni was very, little. But I took so long thinking that then they started making those noises, and then they stood up and they left. And I thought, oh, God, I don't know. Did I know enough things right to be safe? And that night, I was helping to sponsor a dance in the school cafeteria. And the janitor, who was my next door neighbor, came over to me and he said, I heard you had a visitor this afternoon. And I said, yes, I did. And he said, they said you knew everything to do. Fire did not visit me. So there were so many things like that happened, in the village. And I think what I'd like to do, I've talked for an hour. I could talk for days more. But I would like for you to maybe ask some questions. Obviously, this book represents 3 years of experiences and memories and situations and challenges. And I found it hard to fit everything into 231 pages. And I certainly couldn't fit everything into an hour. So why don't you ask me some questions, and then I can tell you what you need to know. Anybody have a... Yeah?
Are you still in contact with anybody from the
Yes.
village?
Yes. We have visited many times. And I think it was in 1988, one of my favorite students called me, and he's visited with us many times, and we've visited with him. And he called me and probably asked me for the biggest favor that I've ever done for anybody, maybe. He said, I have a daughter who's about to be a junior, and she's very smart, and I want her to have some kind of a medical career. And he said, the teachers are using her as the teacher in the classroom because most of the teachers are not Zuni. Most of them are not bilingual. And he said, I'm afraid she's not getting the education she needs. And I want her to come and live with you for 2 years in Lakeville. And I want you to be her English teacher. I had been his English teacher for 3 years. And we thought about it, and we thought, wow, that's a big thing, you know. That year, both of our kids were at PCC at Bridgewater. So it was like a summer program where they went and they stayed all week. So while they were at PCC, we decided that we would fly out to New Mexico and see Dawn and see if we thought she would fit with our family. And we thought she probably would. I'm not sure what my kids thought.
Well, you know what they thought.
Well, yeah, I know what they thought.
Be honest.
Dawn was going to come and be a junior. My daughter Hope was going to be a sophomore. My son Corey was going to be a freshman. So, you know, my two children now had an older sibling, sort of. And Dawn really identified with the two of us. She didn't identify so much with our two kids. But it worked out all right. It was okay. And when she graduated, we had a big party. And Dawn's mother and father and brother came. Her favorite aunt and cousin came. And her maternal grandparents came. And of course, then there were the five of us. So we had 11 people, most of us Zuni, living in the house for about a week and a half. And we plan to be going to New Mexico in this coming May as well. So I'm hoping that we can find some museums and some bookstores that will carry the book. And we have a friend there who's in the book business who's going to help us with that. So.
Well, and Dawn did become.
And Dawn did become a medical person. She worked in dialysis for a long time. But as with many people who work in things that are intense, she's now in administration, which has a different kind of intensity, but it's not.
She didn't go back to her village.
Oh, yeah.
She did.
Oh, yeah.
She did go back to her village. She went to college in New Mexico. And she, the year after she went back, she became Miss Zuni. And it meant you have to be fluent in your language. It's a very difficult language. It's an oral language. It's not, some things have been written down, but not a lot. So she had to be fluent in the language. She had to know the songs and the dances, and she had to wear the costumes and, you know, she became Miss Zuni. So we didn't spoil her or ruin her. Or, she did scoop ice cream at Peaceful Meadows in Middleborough, but that didn't seem to take away her Zuniness. So, and at Apponequet, she was on the National Honor Society, and you know she did very well. She was on the track team, and I had an Amnesty International group that wrote letters, and she did that. And, you know, she participated in everything that we did. We hadn't put water out to our barn yet. And every morning before I drove the 3 kids to school, everybody had to carry 2 buckets of water to the barn for the sheep and whatever livestock was in the barn. So, yeah, we've kept very close contact. We were there last in 2019, and we will be going back this year, like I said. Yes?
I was wondering if you had any other instances of problems with the drinking among your students while you were there.
Yes. yeah, there were lots of problems with drinking and lots of problems with suicide. There are lots of problems with the health thing,
Oh,
diabetes. Dawn told us that she knows of some 30-something people, all in their 20s, who have severe cases of diabetes. The year before I got there, one of the teachers who had been there that year told me when I came that there were 13 attempts at suicide in the high school the previous year. And actually, these are some of the reasons why Carol and I decided not to stay. Once we decided to get married, we both loved it there, and we both had friends and nice memories, and it was a wonderful place to be, but we didn't want to raise children there. And when we got married, we thought we were old. She was 29. Now I know the tendency is to marry even later and have children even later, but I had been born when my mother was still 18. So I thought, oh, will I ever have a family? I don't know. So life is cheap there. You can't drink on the reservation, or you're not supposed to drink on the reservation. It's illegal to have alcohol on the reservation. So people have to drive quite a distance to get it. And people who drive to Gallup every weekend to do their shopping or see a movie or do something else, it's likely that they're going to have a few drinks. And the road home is very dangerous. You can slip off into an arroyo and fall to your death very easily. You know, it's, I think it's mostly fenced with barbed wire now, but when we were there, it was all open range. And the horses and the cows and the sheep, for some reason, like to come in and eat on the verges of the roadway at night. And sometimes they step right in front of you. And I can't tell you how many serious accidents have happened with people driving along and not realizing that 5 horses have just stepped in front of them. So there were other reasons why we left as well. I had a family situation that I wanted to help with. I had a grandmother who had broken her hip and couldn't come home until there was somebody there to help her transition into being home alone again. So we did that for the summer when we got back. But yeah, there were lots of instances. There's now, there's a lot more awareness than there's ever been about what needs to be done. There's a kind of a young health center now where they encourage people to be really athletic, and the kids are all athletic anyway, but they encourage drinking water, and they have these contests for, you know, how many, you just keep track of all the liters of water that you drink, you know, and I'm not sure how exciting that is for people, but...
Well, they get to get free athletic equipment
yes,
to take out and play with.
Right, yeah.
And
And there's now a preschool where everybody is immersed in Zuni, where all of the teachers speak Zuni and all of the kids before they go to primary school are able to speak Zuni. When I was there from 69 to 72, well, one of my students, the father of Dawn, my student, said, when you were here, he said, all the kids spoke really great Zuni and passable English. He said, now everybody speaks passable Zuni and passable English. He said, you know, they have social media like everybody else does. And lots of things have changed that make it not quite as romantic a place as it used to be. The last time we were there was always a kind of a cloud of pinon and cedar smoke hovering in the air from the cook stoves and the the stoves for warmth, but even in summer when people were cooking on wood, you could smell this wonderful pinon smoke. And when we were there this last year, in 2019, this last time, we saw the propane gas truck going around to all the houses. And you can't deny people, you can't expect people to live in a museum for your entertainment. But somehow it feels like something that was really wonderful is lost, you know. Many of the...
What's the economy that they can get money to buy the alcohol, to buy the propane, things like that? It's jewelry.
Yeah, I would say probably 60% at least of Zunis, and it could be more, it could be 75%, live on their income from jewelry making. They're really good.
And fetishes too.
And fetishes. Yeah. And pottery. Pottery has come back, and it's really important. It's now more bought for its artistic merits and for collectors. I mean, people aren't keeping their grain in it or their corn or their, you know, foodstuffs. There is one bed and breakfast in Zuni, if anybody's interested in going. It's called Halona Plaza. It's only $85 a night. And you get breakfast, and you get a wonderful, huge breakfast that these Zuni ladies make for you. And the owner of the bed and breakfast is a man named Roger Thomas. And it sounds like he's American, but he's from Lyon, France. And he married a member of the Van der Wagen family, who were the white Dutch people who came there as missionaries at the end of the 19th century. And members of the Van der Wagen family still live there. And they have the trading posts, and there was a Dr. Van der Wagen there. I don't know that he's still there. Many Van der Wagens are in the school system. But this Roger Thomas was married to a Van der Wagen woman. And he and his son have built the first, most amazing grocery store in Zuni, so that you don't have to drive the 80-mile round trip to Gallup anymore if you don't want to or don't have to. So there are changes, good and bad. Yep.
I love reading your book. It was just like sitting there, having a cup of tea and having you talk. It was lovely.
Thank you. That's nice of you to say. Yes.
I wonder if you just might briefly talk about some of the items that you brought with you.
Okay. Well, I don't bring my best and most valuable pieces of pottery with me because I've become afraid. Prices have spiked so much that something that I paid maybe $100 for could now sell for $10,000. And so I'll tell you about this pot because it's got a story. It's been broken. I had a cat who used to sleep in here. It was on a low shelf on a table in my house in the village. But let me tell you how I got the pot, first of all. I had a student whose name was Philbert Nahohai. And he said, my mother is a potter. And I said, oh, would she make me a pot? And he said, well, of course, come by the house. And so I went, and she said yes. I said, I want this particular motif because this is kind of a motif from the 1880s. And I just like it, the deer with the heart line. And so she had gathered the clay and made the paints and made the brushes by chewing little yucca, pieces of yucca leaf and painting. And put it in a sheet manure kiln outside to fire it rather than an electric kiln. And it's got the indentation here so that the ladies can wear it on their heads. I'm not going to demonstrate. And she said, it will be $50. Now, $50 is nothing today, but in 1969, it was a lot because I was getting $4,300 a year. Paid once a month. My check was about $500 a month. Week number 4 was hell. Luckily, I met Carol there, and she was better about food than I was, and she was a really good cook. So. And she would have me tell you the story. The first time I asked her to go to town with me and to go looking in the galleries and things at things that I couldn't yet have, like weavings and stuff, I invited her to go to breakfast with me. And then, lo and behold, I didn't have enough money to pay for breakfast. I don't know how this happens, but anyway, I got this. Josephine said, I will make it to you for $50. When I went to pick it up, she said, well, it got too close to the oven, the sheep manure oven, and it's got burn marks on it. So I'm thinking it's like a second, so I'll sell it to you for $25. So I was happy to have it be cheaper, but I was disappointed to have this. A few years after I had left Zuni, we all went, my family and I went, and my friend Daisy was getting ready to fire pots in a sheep manure oven. And she said to her friends, put some of them right near the edge so that they get the black marks on them. And I said, why would you do that? And she said, because the dealers from Los Angeles come, and to them, it's a sign of authenticity. It's a sign that it's been made in a sheep manure kiln, and hardly anybody does that anymore. So she said, they will pay thousands of dollars for those. And I thought, oh, if I'd known that, I wouldn't. I had a cat that was deaf. She was totally deaf. And she would get in this pot and curl up and sleep. But she could sense activity, because if a door banged or something fell, she'd know. One day the door banged, and with the wind, and she was in here, and she struggled to get out, and the pot fell off onto the floor and broke. And all I had was Elmer's glue. So I glued it back together. So my pot that cost me $25, that could be worth $10,000 if it were okay. That's that story. And then one of the ladies, Jenny Leate, she was in the adult evening class with me. She's from Acoma, Pueblo, but she married a Zuni man. And this is a miniature wedding vase. Daisy made the two of us a large-size wedding vase. One vessel with two spouts representing each of the couple, where you're supposed to pour each other a drink that's based on honey. We didn't do that no. We've been married 52 years, so I guess it doesn't matter.
What time is the present, Carol?
So this might be one of the most intricate weavings that I have. We bought this. If you go to New Mexico, you should look up the Crown Point Rug Weavers Association. It's a group of people that meets in the Crown Point, I guess it's the high school. Maybe it's the first Tuesday of every month or something like that. And they have a group of Navajo judges there who make sure that all the weavings that are presented to them are authentic and not from Mexico or not from some other tribe. And then the weavings are auctioned off that evening. And there are people there always from everywhere, Japan, Germany, wherever people have lots of money, they find their way to Crown Point. And some of us who don't have much money find our way there too. And I'll sit there nervously all night thinking, oh, I've got to go home with at least one this time. You know, that's why as we plan our vacation, Carol says, well, we don't need to go to Crown Point this time. and we don't. But this is a yay rug. And it would have been woven this way and on a frame. And it's all, well, this is probably machine spun wool, but a lot of them are hand spun wool.
Yours are.
These two, which are mine, are hand spun wool. Carol spun the wool. The sheep that we raised produced the wool. And so this is a fetish. little stone figure, kind of good luck tokens. I was one of the directors of the senior class play the third year I was there, and my students gave me that as a present. I like to, with my weavings, I like to take the really early prehistoric designs. This is an Anasazi design. The Zunis are the descendants of 3 ancient cultures. Anasazi to the north, like where Mesa Verde is in Colorado. The Mogollon from the south and going into Mexico. And the Hohokam, which were living in the cliff dwellings in Arizona. So I take those designs and I make weavings like this. And it looks really simple. It's harder than it looks. But then I don't have much time to do a lot of weaving either. So if I wove all the time, maybe I'd tackle something more intricate.
That's incredible.
Thanks. This is another Anasazi design. Only the blue is a dyed color. The brown, the tan, the white are natural colors. Any other questions?
What's in that? In that basket?
Well, these are dance sashes. These are made of cotton, and this one, for instance, is meant to be worn around the waist. They're woven on a waist loom where you can have 2 different sides, 2 different designs. This is a Hopi wedding sash. And the basket was woven by a Santo Domingo man, which is another one. There are 19 pueblos altogether. Hopi is the one in Arizona. All the others are in New Mexico. And one day when I was at my house in the village, a Hopi man came through selling his baskets. He had a big pile of baskets. And I'm a very acquisitive person about things that I like. And I wanted all of them, of course. But alas, it was $17. I could only afford one. But this is native willows. There's only about 8 inches of rainfall a year out there, and it's not much. And there are little areas where water pools up and where willows grow, and that's where you can get these willows. This blanket right here, I bought from a friend in Plymouth who got it from her uncle in England, who as a young man came to the Four Corners region where Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico all join together. And I'm not sure what he was doing there. I think lots of English people came for the adventure of the West. And he bought this blanket there, and he took it back to England. And when he died, his niece in Plymouth inherited it, and then it came to me. She wanted me to give her a valuation of it. And I thought, this can't be a good thing because it might not be ethical. So I did a lot of research, and I did decide that it did indeed come from the Navajo in the Four Corners region. And I wrote up a whole paper about it, and I sent it to her. And then later on, I got to thinking about it, and I thought, she said, well, so who will buy this from me? And I said, well, around here, probably nobody, because these things aren't known or appreciated all that much here. I find pieces of pottery sometimes at an auction for $25 or $50 that I look up the person who created it, and I find they sell for $5,000 in Santa Fe. So I wrote her a note, and I said, if you took it to the Southwest, you could probably get a lot of money for it. And I said, if you're anxious to sell it, this is the amount I could give you for it. And I got a note from her, and she said, you know, I was in a gallery the other day, and I saw a painting that cost the exact same amount of money that you offered me for the weaving. And she said, the weaving doesn't really mean anything to me, and I love the painting, and I want it, so I bought it. I hope that wasn't unethical. But it's in a good home. Anything else you're curious about? Okay. If anybody has an interest in the book, I'd be happy to sign one for you. And it was delightful to have you here, and I hope I didn't talk too long.
I'm also